How not to have a heart attack. That's the topic of discussion today. I'm 61 years old, live in Northwest Arkansas, and a little over 4 years ago in April of 2021, 3 days prior to my birthday, turning 57, I had a massive heart attack. For 2 years, I told my doctors that something was wrong. I felt a latent pain in my heart. Had some episodes riding on a bike where I felt like my heart wasn't functioning properly. And on a lovely morning in New Hampshire, made a couple of phone calls to some friends, was feeling quite invigorated. I jogged to my yearly physical. Not uncommon for me to take a run and actually literally run my errands. And I was about a 4 mile run. And on the way there, it was the magnitude of my problem was pretty evident. I was suffering to run. I was out of breath. I had no energy, lack of energy. And when I arrived at the doctor's office, I indicated to them that something was definitively wrong, that I knew for sure that something was wrong. It was during COVID, so I had a mask on. I had a hard time breathing. And they said, no worries, we'll do a few tests for you now. Granted, I had done a myriad of tests over the course of 2 years. I had done EKGs numerous times. I had MRIs done. I had CAT scans done. I had numerous x-rays done on my chest. I even had some swallowing studies done because I also was suffering from a little bit of a problem with swallowing. So I thought perhaps that was something that was related to why I had this latent chest pain. All the tests came back that I was fine, nothing wrong with my heart. Everything was great. In fact, I continued to do my active lifestyle. I've run 3 marathons. I've done the EBC trek, the Everest Base Camp trek. I did rim cubed. If you're not familiar with rim cubed, it's rim to rim to rim in the Grand Canyon. Scuba dive, snowboard, mountain bike, road ride. Done 3 marathons over the course of my life. So extremely active. I also ate well, avoided a lot of sugars and bad foods. Ate a lot of vegetables. And in fact, I was vegan for 100 days at one point, and decided I needed to eat a big steak after it seemed like I wasn't getting the nutrition I needed. So no lack of doing the right things. Always had low cholesterol, low blood pressure, never had any of these symptoms that would indicate, or health problems that would indicate that there was something wrong with my body. So on that morning at the physical, I'm in there and I'm very distressed, letting them know that something is definitively wrong. I could feel it. Running to the doctor's office. At this point, I started to get anxious because they took an EKG. They said I was fine. Everything was great. At this point, I was suffering from really an ability to get enough oxygen. And it was a fight or flight moment for me because I realized that the doctor was not going to do anything. So I proceeded to run out of the office, and the last thing I heard from the doctor's office was, hey, wait, you need to pay your bill. Got down to the end of the building. It was a 3rd floor, ran down the stairs, and immediately collapsed into the ground and started to writhe in pain. It was debilitating. It was like I had suffered an ACL, cruciate ligament, suffered numerous times on a mountain bike, breaking various bones and ribs, but nothing even came close to the excruciating pain that I was feeling at this moment in my chest. I was on the ground, and coincidentally, a few doctors from another doctor's office were entering the building, and they asked me if they could help me. I was actually not even able to respond to them because the pain was so excruciating. They called 911. 911 arrived, and at this point, someone from my doctor's office finally came down. In fact, it was the nurse practitioner that I was having my physical with, and she immediately told them that I was having a panic attack. Not quite sure why. I'd been on some medicines occasionally for sleep. That could also be used for anxiety and panic attacks, but never in my life had I had a panic attack. And I know this now with definitive truth because I have had numerous panic attacks. And in fact, the first 6 or 8 months after my heart attack, I had panic attacks on numerous occasions during the day, mostly in the evening, some in the afternoon. Also suffered from post-traumatic stress, which I thought was not something that really existed, I guess, to a degree. I thought, hey, it's just something that happens to people that maybe were in some severe situation, like fighting in a war. I could definitely see where you'd get some post-traumatic stress syndrome, but I thought, never would I have that having a medical health incident, but definitely suffered from that after the heart attack as well. So after the doctor came down and actually delayed any type of activity, saying that I was having a panic attack. In fact, the paramedics finally put me into the ambulance. They were very casual, thinking that nothing was wrong. They even asked me, they said, have you taken your medicine today? Have you taken your panic medicine? And I said, I was very, very angry at this point, and I used a lot of expletives and profanity and said, I do not have panic attacks. By this time, they had hooked me up to an EKG, and I heard from the lead paramedic that this guy has tombstones. He's having a massive heart attack. We need to get him to the hospital as soon as possible. So I proceeded to have my first ambulance ride ever into the hospital. I arrived at the hospital, and I actually called a friend of mine who's chief cardiologist at Duke. I had talked to him numerous times, a good friend from high school, someone I had talked to over the course of the last 2 or 3 years with my health, with my heart. And he said, hey, it's too late. The doctor there said, we need to rush you in. We need to put a stent in you. So I went into the procedure room. The stent seemed to be successful. It came out, and they told me I started to wake up a little bit. I was a bit groggy, and my chest was still hurting exceedingly bad, just very painful. And they hadn't hooked me up to an EKG yet or anything. And they said, no, you just had a stent put in, so you're going to have some residual pain. And at this point, I had another flight or flight incident. I wanted to get up from the bed. They told me later that they had to sort of restrain me, and I went into cardiac arrest. So what had happened is that the stent was not adhered to the artery wall. So any type of micro fissure inside of the stent area was obviously going to cause a clot. So I went from 90% blockage in my heart to 100% blockage in my heart, and I went into cardiac arrest. I was out for a good 8 to 10 minutes. They shocked me about 12 times, and fortunately, I survived that incident. They told me later that the hospital, I was the most important patient at the hospital. They said that everyone was hands on deck, and everyone was trying to help resuscitate me. So at this point, a standard stent procedure went into a cardiac arrest, and 6 days in the hospital recovering from this. While in the hospital, it was another myriad of mistakes and missteps and anxiety-ridden moments. At one point, I was having VTAC, which is unsustained rhythms of your heartbeat. And I could feel them. They said, no, you probably can't feel those, but I could definitely feel them. And one of the hospital administrators came in, and they said, we're going to take you off the medicines that are helping to subdue the VTACs. And I was very distraught, very miserable, very concerned. And of course, I hadn't been sleeping for days. Felt like I was going to die at any moment. Certainly the panic attacks, anxiety, post-traumatic stress was very high in the hospital, and I felt like I wasn't going to survive. Like, I'm not going to get through this. My ejection fraction at this point was around 15 or 20, which is really not sustainable long term. And I asked to talk to some senior hospital administrators because I didn't feel it was necessary to take me off these medicines because my heart was not beating properly yet. And they told me, quote, that they were rolling the dice. At this point, I pretty much had a breakdown, cried uncontrollably. Regardless, they said it was procedure and protocol to take me off. And I felt once again like I did when I was in the ambulance. As I was riding to the hospital, I asked one of the paramedics when I was in the ambulance. I said, "Am I going to live?" And he didn't comment back. And at that point, I thought, this is not a good thing. Later on, I found that I had 90% blockage in my LAD, which is the widowmaker. So it's the worst place you can possibly have in order to have blockage in your heart. So they decided to roll the dice. I did survive through that moment. I continued to fight. And like I said, later in the week, I was in the hospital on Monday. They released me from the hospital on Saturday. My EF was still around 30 at this point, which is sort of borderline ability to function on your own. And when they released me, they would not, the insurance company would not pay for a Holter, which would shock your heart in case you went into cardiac arrest or in case your heart started to go into VTAC. The insurance company wouldn't pay for that. I decided to do that anyway because I was so extremely concerned about my heart, my ability to survive. Very difficult situation because prior to this, unfortunately, probably, I felt like I was invincible. I felt like I was immortal. I felt like I could do anything. Like I said, scuba diving, mountain biking. There was no sort of excursion or effort or adventure that I wouldn't undertake. In fact, my son came up with an interesting saying with my girlfriend because she's as venturesome as me. And one time we were talking with my son Slade, and he said, "You know what the problem is with you two?" He goes, "My dad's the fire." And he pointed to my girlfriend and he said, "You're the gasoline." So fire and gasoline makes for a combustible but very adventuresome and fun environment. So having the heart attack was completely demoralizing, completely incapacitating. And I'll get into more of my story in the next segment of this. What I want to say right now is that based on my experience, based on a lot of the ineptness, incompetence that I experienced through this journey, now this turning into a 6-year journey. It's been a little over 4 years since the heart attack. I want to help other people. I want to help people prevent from having a heart attack. I want to help people recovering from a heart attack. So I've developed and created and in the process of publishing an application called Tom's Heart. And I'll put the link in the description to a website I have called Tom's Heart. I'm in collaboration with the American Heart Association. I am part of the American Heart Association Challenge for their innovations and research team. It's the AH Challenge, where my Tom's Heart application, a chatbot to help people not only set goals, measure how they're doing the goals, to assess your current state, to answer any questions around your physical health, your mental health, your medicine. I really, really am adamant that mental health and medicine are such a big component of your recovery. So look down below. I also put a couple links to some blog posts I did. I have a blog post that sort of outlines and has the entire set of incidences, episodes, and catastrophes that happened during my heart recovery and prior to my heart recovery or prior to my heart incident. Look for that down below as well. I will talk to you again soon, and I will give you a little bit more updates and talk you through what happened over the course of the last 2 years during my recovery. Thanks much, and talk soon.